And this is really the story of Yerushalayim till today, is that we have the old and we have the new. On one hand we have the old buildings, the old story, and the old way of doing things, and the tradition, and to keep things the way they always were. That's one path that Yerushalayim takes from then until today. And then we have the new. Let's change, let's build it up, let's do things differently. And these two paths converge. Sometimes they complement each other, sometimes there's conflict, and we'll see how those two paths actually come together to build up the Yerushalayim that we see. We're now going to go to our first stop, which gives this whole Kikar its name, Kikar Davidka, and we'll start over here. Come with me this way. And what we have is this. No, any questions until now? Any questions? Quick check to the Zoom. No questions yet? Okay. And we'll get back to the birthday soon. So the first stop that we see, look at this impressive looking artillery piece, but don't let it fool you. It's not impressive at all. This artillery piece was called the Davidka. The guy who built it, his name was David, so they called it the Davidka. And he built it for the Haganah to use, the Palmach to use during the Israeli War of Independence. When the state of Israel is founded, they need weapons. Because as soon as the British leave in May of 1948, the local Arabs, the Palestinians, as well as the surrounding Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Transjordan, what it was called at the time, Iraq, they simultaneously attack them. And how are the Jews living in Israel at the time going to defend themselves? Not a simple task. They need, first of all, weapons to defend themselves, literally to survive. Not more than that, that's all they ask for. And so they need weapons. How are they going to get weapons? The Americans did not allow anyone to sell weapons at the time to Israel, the new country. There was an arms embargo. You weren't allowed to sell weapons. Stalin, for reasons of his own, which is hard to understand, it's hard to figure out, Soviet Russia at the time, but he, using Czechoslovakia as a proxy, he sells planes to the new country of Israel. And there's planes that are brought from Czechoslovakia, and they're brought to Israel. That's the first planes of the Israeli Air Force. So they have some planes, they have homemade bullet factories, they take some weapons from the British, they buy weapons on the black market. Remember, this is just 3 years after World War II. There's gun running, and they try to get it, and they try to different things. And by the way, they have a few planes sitting in Tel Aviv that they got from Czechoslovakia through Stalin. What are they going to do with these planes? Who's exactly flying them? So there's another interesting twist to the story. And that brings you guys in America into the picture. Because it's 3 years after World War II, and 550,000 American Jews serve in the American Army during World War II in the Pacific and in the European theater, and now they're back home. Many of them are assimilated American Jews, have nothing to do with the Jewish community or Judaism, Yiddishkeit. They're not religious, and they're definitely not Zionists. And I recently watched a documentary telling the story of what's known as the Machal Fighters, a group of American Jews who were soldiers in the American Army during World War II, who were recruited by the Haganah to come to Israel and fight for the new Jewish state. And they were convinced to do it, and one of them was interviewed, and he was actually a pilot in one of those planes that I mentioned. And he describes it, and it's as if he's talking a story that's like too crazy to even be believed. And he describes that he gets a knock at the door. He's at his parents' home after he had just recently arrived 2 years before, after being abroad overseas, flying missions for the American Air Force. And he goes, and there's a knock at the door. And there's two people at the door, and they say, "We're from the Haganah in Palestine, and we'd like to speak to you." And he says, "What can I do for you?" And he says, "Well, we, the Jewish people in Palestine, are making a Jewish state." "Really? That's so nice. Enjoy. What does that have to do with me?" And they say, well, we heard that you were a pilot in the American Army, in the American Air Force during World War II. And he says, "Yes, I was." He says, "Well, we need you. The Jewish people need you. we need you to fly planes. The Egyptian army is close by. They want to come to Tel Aviv. They want to destroy the new state before it even gets off the ground. The Jewish people needs you. And he says that he decided he's going to come. He had nothing to do with Judaism. He had nothing to do with Zionism. He had nothing to do with the Jewish state. He comes. He gets off at Tel Aviv. And again, you can't make this up. And he says, okay, now what? And a guy meets him and he says, oh, are you the pilot guy? He says, yeah, I'm the pilot. He says, there are the planes. And he points to the end of the airport. And he says, okay, what do you want me to do with the planes? He says, the Egyptian army is down there. Go get them. He says, that's it? Like, yeah, that's it. You got to go. And now that story has nothing to do with the Davidka, but it has everything to do with the Davidka, because it gives you an idea and it gives you a sense of what they were up against at the time. So now we get to the Davidka. Davidka is a homemade weapon. They make 6 of them in a homemade factory, building artillery pieces. Okay, and it was a lousy. The engineer who built it did not do a great job. It had bad aim, and it sometimes exploded too early. It was dangerous. It didn't get very far, and the worst part of it is that it made a horrifying noise when you shot the Davidka. It made this screeching loud noise which is great for surprise. You're trying to surprise the enemy. You don't want anyone to hear. You shoot the Davidka, everyone knows what's coming. So the whole Davidka thing didn't work out. Some Haganah units had a Davidka with them. Like I said, there were 6 of them, but they didn't really use them very much because there wasn't much to do with the Davidka. So how can we put it in such a prominent place and to show everyone that this is what it was and this is what we used to win the War of Independence? The answer is because paradoxically, however you say that, it worked out. They used the Davidka and it did work out. What happened? In the battle for Tzfas, up north, which Tzfas you're also familiar with, the attack on Tzfas was bloody and long, and there were people killed on both sides. But at some point during the battle, the Palmach unit shot the Davidka. Being that it was only 3 years after World War II, how did World War II end? The United States Air Force dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, blowing up 2 cities with these 2 bombs. No one knew much about the technology of the atom bomb, but everyone knew that there's this big dangerous bomb out there that can do a lot of damage very quick. And here, they shoot the Davidka, and it makes this screeching, huge, loud noise, and everyone starts to flee. The Arabs, now most of Tzfas at the time was Arabs. You know that Tzfas was 80% Arab at the time. It was not a Jewish city, very small Jewish population. It was mostly an Arab population, and they start to run for their lives. They say, the Jews have the bomb! The Jews have the bomb, let's get out of here! And the Haganah units walk into Tzfas. They walk into homes, there are beds made, there's slippers under the bed, there's hot water in a tea kettle on the oven. That's how quickly people ran out. And the battle for Tzfas was won because of this defective weapon. So perhaps we can understand that there was someone else fighting the battle for the people, for the Haganah, who was making sure that the battle was won. And it wasn't just the Haganah, and it wasn't just the Davidka.